Welcome back, everyone. I'm delighted today to introduce Christian Cooper. Many of you, if not most of us, first encountered Christian via the wonderful film Birders, The Central Park Effect. More recently, Christian has been a visible and tireless advocate for helping the birding community become more inclusive via Black Birders Week and other events. Christian is a writer and editor, a longtime birder, of course, and a board member of New York City Audubon. As an undergraduate, he was president of the Harvard Ornithological Club. From there, he went on to write comics at Marvel for a number of years. His latest work, the Black Lives Matter comic, It's a Bird, was published digitally by DC Comics. He has an upcoming book called Better Living Through Birding to be published by Random House. Today, Christian will speak to us about the bother of brotherhood in birding. Christian?
Thanks, John, for that really nice, generous introduction. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here talking to the Western Field ornithologists. As John said, my name is Christian Cooper. I have been birding. I am strictly amateur. I want to make that clear. I'm not degreed in ornithology, but I have been birding for just shy of half a century, which pains me to have to say in those terms. When I say it in those terms, it frightens me even. And I am a board member of New York City Audubon. And while I haven't made a career of studying issues of inclusiveness in birding, I've lived it for a while. And I've also recently been thrust into a position where I've been exploring it quite a bit. So let's explore it together, and give me a moment while I start my slides. Okay, the bother of brotherhood in birding, it's not just for old white people anymore. Okay, so I'm going to start by telling you something most, if not all of you already know, that there has been a boom in birding with the pandemic. For whatever reason, it was a way for people to get outside, to engage with nature, to relax, to have an activity. And I just know from my personal experience, I've seen the numbers of birders in Central Park, which is my primary stomping ground here in New York City, zoom up by, I almost want to say 50%, and maybe that's an exaggeration, but spots of the park which we used to have birders, only a few birders, only to ourselves, are suddenly crawling with all sorts of new birders. And when I see these people, of course, I always try to be friendly and introduce myself and meet them. And I say, oh, when did you start birding? And invariably the story is within the last year and a half. So there's been a big boom in birding. The question is, how do we make sure we're capturing as many different audiences and as many different communities in this birding boom as possible? So diversity is a pain in the ass. Let's be clear. It's not easy. It forces you outside your comfort zone. It requires constant and sustained effort. You'll see that shortly. And like reading these slides, it throws you off balance. So, there's no way around those realities. It's just, if you're gonna try this, you gotta realize this is what you're up against. So why bother? Reasons to go to the trouble of diversifying? Because, quite simply, it's the right thing to do. We want as many different kinds of people birding as possible. Birding should reflect the composition of the nation. And right now, many of you may be going like this. And I don't blame you. It is a little bit, kind of dry. Yeah, it's the right thing to do. Yeah, so what? Now, but there's more than that. Let's say that's not enough. What's the other reason? Or another reason to go to the trouble of diversifying birding? Because it's vital to saving the birds and their habitats. How is that? Because the demographics of the country have changed and are continuing to change. And the white population has declined, as we saw from the census results, for the first time ever. And in some areas, for example, here in New York City and many urban areas, the demographic shift has already happened. What that means, if we're not engaging these other communities who are increasing in the population, is that if we haven't engaged them, if we haven't made them realize how important nature is and how valuable nature is to them and their community, then very soon we will have no constituency to advocate for the birds and for preservation of the habitat. And that's something none of us want. You know, you'll go to your US senator from your state and you'll say, hey, you know, we really need to protect this vital watershed for the environment and for the wildlife. And they'll say, you know what, my constituents, they don't care about that. They haven't told me anything about that. So, you know, you're whistling in the wind and no one cares. We can't have that. Not if we want to save the wildlife, not if we want to save the habitats. There's a slower growth, there's a growing multiracial society, but it's changing in cities especially. And that's another important thing to remember. For those of you who have cities in your area, major cities, the change is already happening. And again, that goes back to being able to reach out to your senators and saying, hey, you know what? The people in the cities care about this too. And you can't say that if you haven't engaged those urban communities. So if we don't engage non-white people, they don't value the habitats, the birds, there's going to be no constituency. But there's more than that. There's a nature gap. And that nature gap is that people of color, their communities tend to be deprived of the benefits of nature. There aren't as many parks. There aren't as many trees. And if we can start bringing people to those parks and bringing nature to them, that's good for them. As we saw from the pandemic, and even before that, it's actually, it calms the mind, it restores, it makes people feel better. So it's really important, and this brings us back to it's the right thing to do. So not only is it essential we want to preserve the habitats, but we have an ability to step into that nature gap and bring everybody together, to create a sense of value for nature in new communities, and to bring them to nature, and get them into the nature that they do have in their area, which is restorative for them. So as ornithologists, we have that ability, particularly through birds. So then the question becomes, how do we reach these new communities? How do we increase the diversity in birding? And the answer is, there are no easy answers. You knew I was going to say that, but I said it. There are no easy answers. But what I propose to do in the rest of this presentation is to take a walk through some of the issues you may encounter and how we might begin to address them and how you might begin to think about them. And I want to do that in a way that is interactive, that lets you guys put in the chat some of your responses when I put forward an idea. So there should be, I think, 3 points in the presentation where I'm going to be like, hey, you know what? Tell me in chat what you think of this. And so I would love to get feedback from you guys. And hopefully John will be able to pop in, because I won't be able to see the chat, but hopefully he'll be able to tell me some of what you guys are saying. So I'm going to walk us through those 3 examples that illuminate some of the issues we face. Disclaimer, as I said at the outset, I haven't made a career of studying these issues. Also, this is the Western Field Ornithologists, and I'm a New Yorker, lifelong, though I do spend part of the year now in Palm Springs in Southern California, so which is how I got involved with Western Field Ornithology. So I do have a little skin in the game in the West. Some of the points I'm going to go over may seem obvious, but I think it's worth thinking them through in the specific setting of birding and trying to attract diverse audiences. And hopefully we'll be able to come to some sort of realizations that are helpful by doing this exercise. So that said, here's our first example. If you have a young person of color who shows an interest in birds, introduce him or her to citizen science efforts like eBird. Being part of a larger project can help people help keep people engaged. All right. What's wrong with that example? I would love for you guys to put in the chat what you think may be wrong with that example. Let me go back for a second so that you guys can see that again. Think about that example that I presented, and where does that go astray in terms of opening up diversity in your audiences? And John, I don't know if you have any responses in chat, or if people are still thinking it through.
It does look like some of the responses are starting to come up in the chat. Can you see it, or would you like me to read them to you?
If you could read some of them, that'd be great. I'm afraid if I shift over to looking at chat, you may see, you may stop seeing the presentation. But
yeah, well, here's one that it assumes that young folks have money for technology.
Very good.
Access to technology is limited to people of color. Requires some basics to even get involved. eBird is hard to get into.
Let me, while we're still discussing that, that's an excellent point that people may not have access to technology, but don't assume that just because someone is a person of color, that they don't have access to technology. So you got to kind of thread the needle on that one. You want to be conscious of the fact that they may not have the technology, but don't assume that they don't, because they may. I mean, youth especially, regardless almost of what income bracket or what class or what ethnic group, have cell phones, have smartphones. So anyway, sorry, keep going, Jen.
It seems to be mostly around that. eBird and other platforms have jargon that people don't understand. Lack of access to the internet.
Okay.
Yeah.
I get the sense. I will confess this was a little bit of a trick question. I sort of threw out an idea, and you guys are rightly digging into the idea. But in fact, what I embedded in the idea was some semantic issues that need to be addressed as well. So let's look at those. What's wrong with that example? Introduce him or her to citizen science efforts like eBird. Seems like you've covered the bases there. Guess what? It's a whole new world out there of transgender, gender non-binary, people who use different pronouns. Some of you may yourselves, when you, in your sign-offs, for example, on emails, you may list what your pronouns are. So introducing him or her is immediately possibly putting some people out of your inclusivity. So better introduce them to citizen science efforts. And that brings us to number one: diversity is multifactorial. It's not just race, it's not just ethnicity, it's age, it's gender, it's sexual orientation, it's gender identity or expression, which is something that I know birding tends to skew older, and that's a new one for a lot of older birders that's hard to get comfortable with. You know, the whole idea that you're looking at a person who to you looks like a particular gender. I had it with my friend Martha, and I was talking about them later. I just did it. And I said, oh, well, she, and someone pointed out to me, actually, Martha's pronouns are they and them. And so you've got to be aware of that. And that's something new for a lot of people. Disability status, again, and class. Class is and that came up in the responses about, access to technology. But all of this, and those are only some of the characteristics that we have to think about when we're thinking about diversity. Notice that the first couple are all things that sort of are included in non-discrimination clauses typically, but class is not. So it doesn't have to be just something that's about non-discrimination clauses in the legal sense for it to be something for us to think about when we're thinking about diversity. Citizen science. Oh, that one tripped me up so badly. I was at an Audubon conference where it was exactly about increasing diversity. And they said, yeah, citizen science. Citizen science is a real problem. I'm like, citizen science? What's wrong with citizen science? What's wrong with citizen science? We use it all the time. It's great. We like it. We want people to do that. Think about it. Citizen science, you're excluding people who are not citizens, whether they are documented or undocumented. They may not be citizens. So by saying citizen science, especially in the West, where you're dealing with large groups of people who may not be citizens, but who you may want to include, you should want to include in your efforts to increase diversity. Saying citizen science is immediately going to put them on their guard. So you want to use community science instead. And that brings me to my second point, which is that language is a minefield. Oh, is it a minefield? Community science, not citizen science. Sexual orientation, not sexual preference. Don't say sexual preference. That's offensive to lesbian and gay people like me, because we're like, we don't prefer. This is just what is. We didn't pick this. African American or Black are great, but make sure they are, because you may be talking to someone who is African and not African American, or you may be talking to someone who is Caribbean American. So, and you may be speaking to someone who considers themselves multiracial. So again, remember where I said this wasn't easy? It's not. Latinx, growing in popularity, a way to avoid saying Latino or Latina and gendering the situation. I say perhaps because I'm still trying to suss out myself whether that has been embraced by the Latinx community. The way I look at it is, Spanish is their language. They're going to tell us what we should be using. We shouldn't be telling them. So, the verdict, as far as I'm concerned, is still out on Latinx, whether it's taken home. Pronouns may or may not be a factor. Easiest way to skirt the pronouns is if you're speaking to the person directly. You don't have to use pronouns, or the pronouns you use, the pronoun you use will be you. So that gets you around that situation, but you've got to be aware of it. And so many other linguistic problems that you can stick your foot into. You will make mistakes. I did it just now when I yet again referred to my friend Martha and I said she when I should have said they. So you will make mistakes, but that's not a reason to not to try. And generally people, if they see you're making the effort, they'll give you some leeway. They'll forgive the mistakes. And the thing is to learn from those mistakes and get better every time. And something else I wanted to point out about that example. We were talking about a young birder, and that is very important. Get them while they're young. You'll not only make a lifelong birder, but you'll draw the family in as well. And I found that in my efforts. I do volunteer work in schools through New York City Audubon, where we take the kids out in underprivileged communities and take them to local parks and get them birding. And what I've found is that when you get the kids hooked, suddenly the parents are getting hooked as well. So you can involve communities through getting the young people. Plus, if you get them young, you're probably making a lifelong bird. Example number 2. All right, here's a flyer for an upcoming walk that you're going to hold, and you want to get as many diverse people there as possible. You want to diversify the audience. So all are welcome on a bird walk in one of the best locations for birds in all of Southern California. Beginners welcome. Sunday, October 2nd, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. So grab your binoculars and join us. All right. Once again, if you're trying to attract a diverse crowd, what's wrong with this example? So put it in the chat. Let me put that back up for you. Give me some of the things where perhaps I've gone astray with this flyer.
The photo only shows white men.
Ding!
That binoculars may not be something that they have.
Ding!
Provided, then that might be nice. Yes,
Good.
at 9 a.m. on a weekend is awfully early for normal people.
Yeah, I'm not giving on that one. If you want to see the birds, you got to get your butt out there at least semi-early. To me, 9 a.m. is way too late. You should be out there at 6 or 7. But
it's Sunday. It's Sunday. It excludes many religious people.
Ding! Oh wow, someone got there. All right.
Also, it's unclear if it's accessible.
Ding! Very good. All right. So you guys are on the ball here. Let me just walk through some of those. All right. So all are welcome on a bird walk. Again, language is a minefield. You're calling it a bird walk. You might want to call it a bird outing or a bird expedition, because some people don't walk. That goes to accessibility. One of the best locations for birds in all of Southern California. If this flyer is for Southern California, it should also be in Spanish. And this, of course, will vary on depending on what your location is. If you're doing a flyer, say for Seattle, maybe you have to have some Asian languages in there. I say Asian languages, and I didn't say Chinese, but because there is no single Chinese language. The question is, oh, do you use Mandarin? Do you use Cantonese? Do you use something else? You've got to know your community in order to know what language you should be using. The photo, again, we already talked about it. It's all white men, no good. It's not going to make people feel welcome. Sunday, that's a huge one. I can't tell you how many times I've had to say to people, you know what? If you put your walk on a Sunday morning, you're almost certainly not going to get a lot of the Black community. And I say that as someone who is unchurched. I grew up not going to church at all, but I'm an exception to a largely true rule that a lot of Black families are in church on Sunday. And I would hazard a guess also a lot of Latino families. So that's something else to worry about. Grab your binoculars. Binoculars, well, let me walk through the slides as I'm doing this. This isn't just photo, it's a photo of white birders. When folks like to see themselves doing something, it helps them imagine them doing it themselves. Bird walk, diversity is multifactorial. So here it's disability, language is a minefield. Bird outing is better. Birdability is actually a movement right now, and there's birdability.org, which is trying to make sure that accessibility is considered when people offer bird outings. And it's not just disability status. You've got to think about how will your target audience get to the outing? Is a car required? Do the people you want to get there, do they have cars? Are they likely to have access to public transportation to get them to wherever this is happening? Where does your group hold meetings? You know, if you're always holding your meetings in the same part of town, you know, it might behoove you to move it around every once in a while to a different part of town where you might get a different audience. Southern California, we talked about how it should be in Spanish. Consider the language, be culturally sensitive. Number 5. What did I skip back here? Oh, number 4, consider accessibility. Okay, and what was number 3? 3 was beware of unconscious bias. Yes, unconscious bias in the photo. You got to be aware of that. 4, consider accessibility. 5, be culturally sensitive. Sunday, October 2nd, we just talked about that. And then culturally sensitive, again, grab your binoculars. Binoculars can be the single greatest barrier of entry to birding for would-be enthusiasts. So if at all possible, if you were trying to get new birders into your group, you want to have some loaner binoculars available that you can give to them. You know, they may be cheap. We may consider them substandard, but it's better than nothing. And it lets them practice using binoculars so they can master that crucial skill for birders. So here it is rewritten. Notice the picture has changed. I've gone neutral by showing a bird instead of showing birders. But you could show birders, particularly if you wanted to lure a particular audience. You might be able to show, you might want to show a bunch of Black birders or a bunch of Latino birders or Latinx birders. And then you'll see birding outing, Southern California, otro lado en español at the bottom, saying, oh, flip it over. You can read this flyer in Spanish. Beginners welcome. We moved it to Saturday instead of Sunday, and binoculars will be available on loan. Join us. All right. This example, I'm not going to solicit any comments in the chat on. I'm just going to tell you what happened, and because it was something that happened to us here in New York City Audubon, and it was incredibly painful but instructive, and we're hoping to learn from it and do better in the past. And that was one of our own board members, dynamic person, very outgoing and very assertive. You know, she was a force of nature, basically, and we were delighted to bring her onto the board and also to have her, as she had been doing for a while, running walks in Spanish, reaching out to people. Fantastic. And then she got alienated, and then finally she got so alienated that she abruptly quit the board. And she said something that at first I had no awareness of. I didn't know where it was coming from. She said, I don't have the tools that Dorothy has as a white woman to deal with this conflict, because she was in conflict with somebody else on the board. It happens. We've all been on boards. We know that people have different attitudes or different ideas about things. But she was in conflict with this person on the board, and she said in a meeting I was in, I don't have the tools that Dorothy has as a white woman to be able to deal with this effectively. And I'm like, what is she talking about? She's dynamic. She's outspoken. She's outgoing. She's a force of nature. What tools does she think that Dorothy has that she doesn't have? And I was forced to go back to my own experience. And when I did, and when someone pointed out to me what she was trying to say, I was just like, how could I have been such a dolt? Because when I started at Harvard, I was a middle class, lower middle class kid from the suburbs of Long Island. And here I was suddenly in this Ivy League school of Saltonstalls and Cabots who were legacy students and had been there for generations. And they talk about how they wintered in Gstaad. And I had no idea even what Gstaad was. And I felt like a fish out of water. I felt like I didn't have the tools to be able to compete, to talk on an equal plane, equal footing with these people. Now, what happened was, given enough time, I picked up what I needed to pick up, and I realized these people are talking out of their ass. They don't have anything over me, and I felt perfectly comfortable being me and saying what I had to say and asserting myself in situations where it was necessary. But the woman we lost from our board never had the chance to arrive at that place, and I never recognized that she was struggling with that. And that's a failure that I'm hoping we can all learn from that example and be aware of that because you bring somebody in, the hardest part of all is retention. You'll be able to bring people in, but if they don't feel comfortable, if they don't feel like they're welcome, if they don't feel like they have the tools to be able to talk on an equal footing with the other people there, you're gonna lose them. And that was something I said to our board. I said, you know what? I should have known better, and I didn't, and we can't have this happen again. Because you know what? You're not going to have a board full of, Black people who are just like Chris Cooper. You don't want a board full of Black people who are just like Chris Cooper. Go back to diversity when I said we want class as an aspect of diversity. You want people from a whole bunch of different classes active in your organization, on the board in your organization, so they can let you know what issues are important to people of other classes. You want that input. You want that. And so you've got to make sure that everyone is welcome. What helped me when I was at Harvard was my immediate group of friends, my roommates and all of that. We were all, great with each other, and, that helped me feel comfortable, at least in that microcosm. So that's a lesson to take is, make sure that if you bring somebody in, that they have a mentor to go to, or they know that there's someone they can turn to when they're feeling like that fish out of water, where they can get reassurance or backup, or just some background information where somebody can say, hey, you know what? She's kind of a jerk sometimes to everybody. Don't feel like it's aimed specifically at you, or whatever the situation is. So that's a little bit of a tougher example of how to handle diversity, but it really is the hard part, retention. Someone doesn't feel comfortable, they won't stick around. Make sure folks know that you've got their back. And a good example of that is I heard this story about these two Black guys who were canoeing on the water as part of a group. And this truck with a Confederate flag on the back was hovering around, and finally someone took shots at them. They weren't hit. It's unclear whether they were trying to hit the two Black guys, but they were definitely trying to frighten them. And this is where, allyship is key, because, ideally the other folks in that group would have made sure to photograph those guys, get their license plate, and made damn sure that those two guys in the canoe knew that, hey, you know what, we've got your back, and you are not in this alone, we're standing with you. Mentorship is great for helping people assimilate into your group, knowing that they have somebody to turn to. And extreme cases may require concerted action. What do I mean by that? Let's say you have someone who's a longtime member who's an outright racist. and they just can't seem to curb themselves in expressing their racism or making some of the new folks you're trying to bring in feel uncomfortable. Then if you're serious about diversity, you may have to make it clear to that longtime member who is a racist that they're no longer welcome. So that's a bridge you may have to cross someday. So it's something to think about. Sorry. Meet people where they are. Figuratively, that means, what are their concerns? What are the concerns of your audience? Are they worried about, high asthma rates? Well, that's an air pollution issue, especially out west with the fires and all the smoke from the fires. That's an issue. But if your audience is concerned about that, you want to find out where your concern about the air quality and their concern about asthma rates overlap. And once you find those commonalities, it's a great way to begin building relationships with communities that you haven't had relationships with before. And why are my slides not moving forward? There we go. Literally, take birding to the neighborhoods you want to reach. This is hard for some of us. I know it's hard for me because Central Park is ACE's birding. I go there and I know I have a great chance during migration to see amazing things. But you know what? Sometimes it's better to go to those little pocket parks where, as a longtime birder, you're not going to see anything you're super interested in. But for new birders, it's going to be amazing. And so you want to take birding to them so that you're not asking them to come to some reserve, even though that reserve has great stuff. You're taking the birding to a local park where, they'll see robins and I don't know, what scrub jays, and you'll be like, yeah, so what? But they'll be amazed. So consider that. Local situations will make all the difference, so your mileage may vary. Remember number 5, be culturally sensitive. So what works in one place may not work in another place. You will make mistakes. That's okay. Just keep at it. 8, be creative and expect failure. If you expect immediate solutions, now's the time to reset your expectations. We at New York City Audubon have been chipping away at this for quite some time. We've actually made great strides in terms of diversifying our board, and we've begun to diversify our staff. We have not had as much success yet diversifying our membership, but we're hoping to do that with things like our walks in conjunction with Black Birders Week. And then I led a walk for Juneteenth through Central Park. We didn't see a lot of birds because it was June 19th, which is not a good time to be finding birds in Central Park. But we had an amazingly good time and everyone was thrilled. I was making all sorts of apologies. I'm like, I'm really sorry we didn't have more birds here. And they're like, what are you talking about? We saw that Baltimore Oriole's nest and we saw that red-tailed hawk at the top of a tree and they were thrilled. So, reset your expectations and just keep chipping at it. And I can't say it enough times, you'll make mistakes, but what matters is learning from those mistakes and doing better next time. So in summary and to review, diversity is multifactorial. Language is a minefield. Oh, is it ever a minefield? Beware of unconscious bias, whether that's in the photos you choose or in the wording you choose, again, reflecting back to language is a minefield. Consider accessibility, both in terms of people with disabilities and in terms of the people you're trying to get to your walks having access to the location. Be culturally sensitive. Translate things into the languages you need to translate them into, and have someone professional do it so you're not making clunky mistakes, depending on whatever community you have in your area. Retention is the hard part. You want to make sure people know they are welcome. You want to partner them up with a mentor if at all possible, but at least make sure they know there's someone they can turn to. And then meet people where they are. Take the bird walks to them. Meet them on the issues that are important to them. Be creative and expect failure. Final question. What's wrong with the title of this presentation? The bother of brotherhood and birding. Jump into that chat and let me know. This is an easy one. It's not hard. The bother of brotherhood and birding. What's wrong with that title?
Brother. They say brother, brotherhood. It's gendered.
Exactly. We're cutting out the women. No, we are not allowed to cut out the women. We want to make everybody included. Remember, diversity is multifactorial. That was an easy one. And finally, I want to end with another example. This is not a what's wrong with this example. It's actually a positive example. And that's the example of Elliot Kuttner. Now, Elliot Kuttner was one of the founders and longtime president of South Shore Audubon Society out on Long Island, where I grew up in New York. And he led the bird walks for South Shore Audubon for years and years and years. He's passed now for a couple of years, but for many years before that, he led those walks. He always did them on a Sunday, and that was a problem because it meant that, you know, as we talked about it, you weren't going to get a large turnout of African Americans necessarily on a Sunday. But, you know, he had good reasons for that. He himself was a very observant Jew, and he's like, you know what? I'm not going to lead walks on a Saturday. That's the Sabbath. And so it's going to have to be on a Sunday. So, you know, he had good reasons and he did that. But when he saw a young Black kid show up at one of those walks, and that kid obviously had an interest in birds, he made it his personal mission to make sure that that kid was nurtured from there on at every walk, that he was welcomed, that his dad was welcomed so that they would keep coming. And so that, and he just fed that kid's knowledge of birds. And that kid was me. And I am forever grateful to Elliot. And Elliot's gift to me keeps giving, because now I reach out to communities all over, reaching out to Black communities, Latino communities, Asian communities. This is a picture of our Black Birders Week walk. And you can see there's a range of faces there of all kinds. And so that is what happens when you take the time to actually, you know, make the effort to reach out. It is a ripple effect that will continue on long after we're gone with any luck, and keep spreading until we have everybody birding in the world. Why not, right? Let's get everybody birding of all kinds so that we can protect the birds and their habitat, and also the bonds forged between people while they're birding transcend any kind of barriers that people throw up in their daily lives. And that's an amazing and beautiful thing. So that's it. Thank you. And I hope those examples have been instructive and useful and help you think through some of the things you should be addressing when you're thinking about diversity in birding. And I'm happy to take questions and comments, etc.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I am looking down at the question pane now so that I can pull up your questions and ask them. So there's a link to something that I'm unable to click. I'm sorry, I can't look at that right now. But Peter Pyle has a question. He says,
Okay.
Excellent all around. What do you think of the recent ideas to change common names of birds named after white men of yore, or of names in English when an indigenous name is available?
I am 100% behind the dropping of the person common names. And, you know, it doesn't have to be a white person. It doesn't have to, you know, that's the beauty of the movement, is that it is neutral. It is not subjective. And there's good biological reason for it. If we are calling something Wilson's warbler, that tells us nothing about what we're looking at. If we call it, you know, the black coronated warbler, that at least tells you something about the bird and what you're looking for and looking at. So there's sound biological reason for it. It takes the arbitrariness out of it. Nobody has to sit there saying, oh, well, this guy was kind of bad, but he was kind of good. It's like, no more people names. All common names are gone. Now, as far as using indigenous names, that's new to me. I have not heard that proposed. It's something I'd have to think about a little bit more. I think in a lot of cases it would be fine. I think in some cases we may be setting ourselves up for tongue twisters. I just remember when a woman I used to work with named Shechla came into my office and she goes, "Nobody says my name right but you," because it's spelled Shehla. And I asked her how it's said, and she told me, and then I called her Shechla. And she said, "Nobody says it right but you." And I'm like, "Shechla, that's because that sound doesn't exist in English." So it's not that people are trying to be mean. It's that they just don't know how to wrap their mouths around it. So that would be the one caveat I would give to the idea of indigenous.
All right. Another question. This one comes from Bob T and Julie C. Would you talk a little bit about the comic you wrote last year, It's a Bird, that explores the intersection of race and birding?
Sure. I'm not. I kind of think the comic speaks for itself, but obviously it emerged out of what I call the incident of great notoriety. But it's not based on that. It draws from that. It draws from experiences other people of color have had that they've told me about. It comes from other experiences I have had as a person of color being out in the field. And so I wanted to sort of explore those in the context of, all right, what does this say about what Black people face in society in general and the outcomes when these biased attitudes get translated over to dealings with the police, which of course has been front of people's minds for a lot of reasons. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. That's what the comic was really sort of trying to do in a magical, realist way. And through something I love, birding. And I think the most interesting thing about it was, first of all, the artist Aletha Martinez did an amazing job. And what she did was juxtapose those images of those things we love, being out in nature, the extraordinary green spaces and the extraordinary creatures we're looking at, and juxtaposing those with the moments of horror when Black people fall at the hands unjustly of police, and trying to bring a little grace at the end of that. And if you haven't read the comic, I won't say how that happens, but yeah, that's about all I can say about it.
Oh, that gets me kind of teared up a little bit. So a couple more questions. Kurt Leuschner asks, will you lead an outing on a Saturday this winter in Palm Springs for WFO?
No, next question. I hate leading walks. I absolutely hate leading walks. And they had to, they didn't have to twist my arm. I actually volunteered, but I volunteered to lead 3 walks this October from New York City Audubon here, specifically aimed at, we're calling it Harlem Goes Birding, and specifically aimed at capturing those new birders and making more of them Black and brown people by getting people who live around the northern end of Central Park, which is Harlem, into the park and looking at birds. So, that hits my passions and I'll sacrifice myself to do that. But man, do I hate leading walks. Absolutely hate it.
Okay, Kurt, I think you have your answer. And then one last question from John Dunn. Is the Audubon Society considering changing their name?
Oh, yeah, that's a huge controversy. We're all wondering that too. National is sort of an entity unto itself. They don't necessarily always clue in the chapters as to how their thinking is going. I know at New York City Audubon, we have not heard anything necessarily from National about how their thinking is on that. I personally have very, very mixed feelings about it. If anyone hasn't read it, you should read it. It's long, but it's worth reading. The essay that, oh God, why is my brain blanking? Oh God, Mr. Black Birder. I mean, he wrote Birding While Black. Drew Lanham. Thank you. Professor J. Drew Lanham wrote this beautiful, nuanced, thoughtful essay about what Audubon meant to him and how he had conflicting emotions about that. And I'm in largely the same place. So will Audubon change the name? We don't know. We got to wait and see what they come out with.
Right. Well, thank you so much for a really enlightening presentation. I'm going to bring John Harris back in, and he'll tell us what's coming up next.
Hey, Christian, thanks so much. I've been thinking during this presentation about how, I mean, not only is this something that we're discussing a lot in our own group, but WFO really has a membership that includes a lot of people in leadership positions in Audubon chapters and other bird groups and clubs. And so I think one thing that we can do is provide a forum for people to get together and talk about these issues. So I really appreciate your presentation. And whoops, I think may have forgotten to start my video, but anyway, so we'll have a break for a little while, and our next event is a science session at 3:30. So thank you all for coming. It was a great discussion, and we'll see you in a bit.